Thanks for that, Tom. Right, so I guess this is really for the audience. We've obviously have Claire as well. In fact, Claire, would you like just to quickly introduce yourself? Because who's random Claire? Hang on.
I was going to say that I'll probably introduce myself because probably nobody really knows who Medivet are. So I'm Claire. I've only ever worked at 3 companies. I actually did psychology at university, but then Then I joined the IBM graduate training scheme. So I was there for about 11 years. Then I joined Boots because Boots were outsourced to IBM. So I know I've got some ex-Boots colleagues here. Then I joined a company called Well Pharmacy. So I got a bit fed up with big companies by that point. I was a bit like, you can never deliver anything. It's really hard. So I went to Well Pharmacy, which were the pharmacy arm of the cooperative group that they'd sold when it all went a bit pear-shaped for the co-op. And then about 18 months ago, I was approached to join Medivet. And so Medivet is a chain of veterinary clinics. So it was very London-based originally. There's now about 450 veterinary clinics across the UK, plus we've got some businesses in Germany and Spain. We were sold last year to a big private equity firm, CVC Capital Partners. You'll see, most vets now are owned by one of the big 5. So there's a lot of consolidation going on. So it's a very sort of fast growth, PE-backed company, but it's also very lovely because it's a veterinary surgery. And when you go in, you get to see little hedgehogs and things that people have been brought in. So anyway, that's me. Very nice to meet you all.
Wonderful. Right. Extend that, can't we? Okay, right. So, and obviously thanks to the 3 keynote speakers. So, what would the audience like to ask them?
One question for Carl. So, when you built the app for A&E that took 3 months, what did you do differently?
Do you want me to repeat the question for the sake of? So the question was, when we built the A&E application that booked people slots for A&E, what did we do differently to get it delivered so quickly? So one of the things was technical decision making. Sometimes those decisions can be a bit slow for obvious reasons. There's lots of thought involved in it. Sometimes when there's lots of architects in a room, we call them an argument of architects for a reason. But we had 3 teams. And they had a kind of a method of technical decision for the technical leads, not necessarily an architect. That meant they just got quorum and went with it because they needed to get things done really quickly. So they all kind of embedded that culture because they knew they needed to do this quickly. There's loads of other stuff. We didn't cut corners. You can't cut corners to something that's going to book people into A&E, right? But it was about just refining and getting rid of all the chaff that you might normally do because I can't. Is it Parkinson's law that is like the length of time you'll to undertake a task in expands based on the time you have to do the task? That's absolutely true. And if you suddenly have less time, you'll cut out the chaff.
Thanks, Carl.
Related to that, has that made you reconsider the way in which you're going to deliver projects and rapid innovation pieces? I live in a world where we've got these big long waterfall programs that take forever, and then we have agile and into continuous integration, continuous development, and lots of people that are agile, and it's an excuse to do bad waterfall. And the fact that we have weekly governance boards. Do you think we've got a psychology in this industry that's basically wrapping ourselves around frameworks that are actually good for the outcomes that we're trying to achieve? So do you think what you did challenges that, and what can we take as learnings, and how do we challenge these kind of behaviours of, we'll see you next week and we'll chat about something, or we do stuff in our chunks?
So have we learned anything from that to expedite delivery in general? And the answer is yes, we will have, but there was a unique factor involved at that time, which was that the risk of things suddenly minimized. Like, the reason you make decisions take longer and be more careful is because we're risk averse, and especially in the healthcare system, right? You need to be aware of clinical outcomes, etc. But when loads of people, unfortunately, are getting very ill already, what's the risk anymore, right? There is none. You're just going to help people you're going to actually save lives, whatever you do. So when the risk goes away, all the governance can go away, or a lot of the governance can go away. So, like, can you apply that now? Well, the risk is back again. There's not lots of people getting ill from that thing. So now you do have to think about all the clinical risk to that increased point, because the downside has reappeared. So yes, it teaches us about how we can change how we deliver software, but in that environment, actually, the big thing was the risk difference.
So you're really setting the risk of being rapid against the risk of inactivity being greater than the risk of being rapid. I guess what I'm saying is, if you've got a list of 100 projects, 20 of them might fall into not that category, but a category of, if this fails, I'd rather fail fast in a month than spend 12 months.
Yeah, failing fast. So at BJSS, we're big believers in agile, DevOps, etc. And take it out of that environment where it's clinical risk. And yeah, absolutely. You saw the experiment we'd done with the fertility clinic. It's 10 weeks. We fail quick, right? We iterated loads of different solutions, failed quickly, learned from it, created a solution that's massively life-changing, right? I absolutely believe in that, but I don't believe that this changed that. We've been doing that for a long time, and I believe that's the right way to do it where you can.
Lisa, I think question. So what emerging technology do you guys think, girls and guys think, has got most value to your business, and why?
Should we start with the left? Gives me time to think about the answer.
So I'm not going to say ML right now, only because I totally agree with the point that Carl made in his presentation, which is ML is a great tool. It's highly developed in certain industries. It's a great tool for basically making recommendations, but not decisions. It saves people's time. It sifts down data sets to manageable chunks that people can then spend the time on. And contrary to sometimes the opinion in the media, ML doesn't lead to loss of jobs, right? It basically means people can spend their time on higher value activities, in my experience. So I think ML is great, but it's also noisy. So there are challenges with using that in the financial industry. So I actually think it's about data. In my space, data, the continued focus on data engineering, data and data science, but actually it's the data engineering, because you need good engineering before you can do the science. And I find you've got to bring that data in at huge volumes, have it available to do these really interesting queries, aggregate quickly. You've got 10 years of history online. You can't be restoring that, takes months or whatever. So actually just the data side and it has huge focus, particularly regulatory, around the lineage and the governance on that. So that's a lot of skills in that space around bringing different pipes, a lot of cloud solutions there now as well.
Thanks. Yeah, I think as the headmaster said, the pupils who are going to be leaving this school are going into probably the most uncertain future, that we've seen on different fronts. And I'd agree, so data to enable us to make better decisions when every day something's changing, whether it be in finance, whether it be the environment and the challenges we're facing with that, whether it be business or social. I think, data science, even if it sifts it down to a marginally more manageable level, that for me where it's all going to be. Look at what we're getting from in terms of the war crimes investigations in Ukraine. Even they're using social networks data to try and prove who did what and who didn't do it. This missile that landed in Poland, they're using social networks to try and track that. That's all data. That's amazing. So I think that's where it's going for the future.
I mean, I agree, but it would be quite dull if I said data as well. So certainly within veterinary, what we're seeing is like a much more of a kind of technology being applied much more to kind of clinical systems and clinical outcomes. So a big area of kind of growth is things like pet wearables or particularly microchips. So, as a clinician, obviously the problem you've got as a vet is the patient doesn't talk and tell you what's wrong with it. So being able to monitor that pet by microchips that can then provide information about their temperature, their movement, and that's a big area I think that will grow, and people will spend on their pets. Like when you do any kind of surveys, people will go hungry practically themselves to make sure that their pet is well thought of. So, we must, like as an industry, we need to kind of modernise a lot more than we are. And there's a big opportunity to use. I guess it's Internet of Things, isn't it? More around pet care in my world.
More questions?
Ask a bit more of a general one. I think one of the biggest constraints, and why we're here, is to talk about talent and the talent needed for the challenges over the next 5 years in terms of where we go. What is each of your views on how you maintain talent and will take that talent into your businesses, and how you will find them as it goes forward?
So we've over the last 2 or 3 years significantly changed what a consultancy typically looks for. You mentioned boot camps, etc. And we have an engineering academy in place. We bring in people from all sorts. It used to be going into consultancy was very much computer science degree or something like that to be in software. Really, being honest, it did. That's absolutely no longer the case. We bring those people in from boot camps, from apprenticeships, lots of either short apprenticeships or degree apprenticeships, and provide them kind of like an intense 4 weeks. But it's not all about, and you just do so many different things that exposes you to such a breadth that you kind of figure out the area you want to do, and then you support them through getting them on real work as soon as possible, supported with a good team. It's not rocket science, but it really, what we've done is open up to load more people. We also invest a fair amount in charities that go out to schools and disadvantaged children that might not learn about computing, and get them into it at a much earlier stage. We work with Turing Lab in the past and other organisations like that, and that really helps.
So, in my experience, I guess that. There's recruitment and then there's retention, isn't there? So recruitment, it is a challenge, but I'll answer a bit more around retention. I think people like to have a purpose of something that they're delivering that's important. People like to deliver something that they believe in and they care about, and that they ultimately, deliver something good. And so I think that's one aspect, is being clear to the purpose of your organisation, and if you've got an organisation with a good purpose, obviously that makes it a lot easier. And then I think you've got to value your people. I spend a lot of time, I really value my people. Like recently, I invited them all to a away day, and I personally wrote a Christmas card for everybody with a personalised message and everyone. And it makes such a difference. So I think some of it is just treating people with the respect they deserve. And you then find your retention's good, I think. So I don't think there's any real rocket science to it. I think it's just being a good leader and being, caring about your people. And the only other thing I would say is, I have, where we have had real issues, particularly in software engineering, because probably they're all going to Goldman Sachs and making loads of money. We've ended up using Romania, and we're getting where we've augmented rather than outsource it. We augment our teams with people in Romania, and it's worked really well. So I think just having that kind of probably slightly global outlook, even in my case, a smaller business, has been really positive for us.
Thank you. I think the sense of purpose, I think you're spot on with that one. When I was trying to recruit people maybe 10, 15 years ago, nobody talked about that. When you asked about, do you have any questions for us? We get very different questions now to what we had then. A lot of it is now about flexibility, which Richard mentioned. It's about our sustainability policy, ESG. It's about purpose. So the Barratt Foundation, which we spend a lot of money, everybody in Barratt has 2 days volunteering time per year. Things like that come up, and it really does make a difference, especially to early stage careers, so apprentices and graduates. Absolutely agree. Retention and recruitment are very different. But yeah, they're the big things for me, and just giving them a sense of purpose. You know, don't put them in a dark room and say just code that. Don't worry why, just do it. You know, it's get out with the business, go and see it working. We ask people to spend 2 days on site every year, you know, on a building site to see what's actually happening out there, and the feedback is they'd like to do more, and that's fantastic. You know, you can see what you're doing every day makes a difference to the business.
I mean, I'd echo all the points that were made earlier. I mean, you talked about 5 year, you know, over the next 5 years. So I think there's the acute constraints, and then there's 5 years. I think the 5 to 8 is more important that we focus on that now, because it's not the urgent, but it's the important. And it will take 5 to 8 years to grow the level of people, number of people with the relevant skills that can hit the ground running in jobs. And you do need to capture the imagination, I think, of the current generation of students at school to help them better understand what the different roles are out there. The statistic I heard from some of the other partners we work is a lot of the jobs that they will, you know, don't exist yet, right? And so you're selling that, you're going in, intervening in schools early, telling the story, trying to break down the stereotypes of what is computing, is it technology, is it programming? No, it's a full gamut of different roles that are really, really interesting. I think that's the choice. I think connecting it to real issues that resonate with young people. So, you know, combustion engines will be banned by 2030. That's a fact. So the assumption is it will be replaced by electric cars, probably, not so much hydrogen. That will require a vast re-electrification of the grid in the UK. It couldn't support that today. So that's a huge engineering undertaking. You know, capture the imagination. I think a lot of people would probably resonate with that. You know, the addition, the expansion of renewable energies, whether it's wind farms, all of these are inherently not just engineering. There's a big engineering component to them. They're going to manage the grid. That's a really interesting problem. You've got mathematicians in there. You've got a really good sense of fulfillment, contributing back to society. I think connecting those themes is one way, and trying to explain the range of roles, because I do think the biggest impediment is people have a narrow view of technology. That's why I use the word engineering. I try to just break down those, because that can be the difference between, in my case, it was one book that my brother gave me that sparked an interest. If that hadn't happened, what would my route have been? I couldn't guess. But sometimes it's just the serendipity of you hit enough places, enough young people, you spark enough interest to kind of get the scale of what the West Midlands will need in the next sort of 5-10 years.
I should probably have a view on that question as well, I guess. Amber, could you order some Christmas cards, by the way? So it's a complex point, isn't it? But and it starts actually with people in the room, right? That if you're going to help to unblock some of the supply issues with talent, it starts when people are really young. So it's one of the reasons, obviously, we want to come to the school. But actually, all of us, as well, the people in the room that are parents, or maybe the people in the room that aren't parents, being able to talk to younger children about, younger people about what this industry is all about, that's a starting point. It's an educational point, right? Because unless you shift more people into this world, there's always going to be some supply issues. And then when you come into the workplace, it's then about doing a sort of, one of the things I've enjoyed a lot, particularly over the last couple of years, actually, is it's enabled me to have much more intelligent commercial conversations with customers. Because before it was, Rich, can you find me one of these people? Suddenly we're having to push back and go, and that's all well and good, but you really need to define what your EVP is. You need to talk to us about that. Do you understand it? What are you doing for your people? And we need to be able to explain that, because otherwise they're not going to come and work for you. So if you are to look, so actually, even in technology, whilst you've got your day-to-day challenges, you've got to be thinking about, almost with a marketing hat, how do you improve, how do you create, how many organisations in here can genuinely say they've got a defined career path for their people? I suspect it's not everyone, right? It starts with that. It starts about the flexibility. It starts about being more of a global outlook. In the past, when I first got into the industry, all I could see was people like, CIOs just offshoring to India, right? and that created this chasm and shortage of talent for many years in the UK. Now people are looking at, yes, the UK. Actually, there's much more in-house engineering built, to protect IP and other reasons. But, Portugal, Romania, Ukraine, tricky one at the moment, obviously. But, looking at a slightly more global basis, during COVID, of course, if you'd offshore to, I don't know, TCS or someone like that, there was real issues getting your teams even working, right? Because they were, suffering from COVID. And so, one of the things I did was I thought, right, maybe there's an opportunity here. We went and partnered with a business in Vietnam, and they had next to no issues with COVID. So we could talk to contacts and go, look, actually, why don't you try these folks in Vietnam? There's a lot less churn. So you can look at it different ways. One thing I will say about Portugal and in Romania, that there's been huge inflation in salaries over there, by the way, as well. So, but taking it different facets, think of it with almost a branding hat on, not just your day job, I think will help.
Talks about a lot of growing technologies such as machine learning. I want to know about each of your opinions on the future and the importance of blockchain technology.
That was funny because I was joking to Carl about that. But let's go to Tom first, perhaps.
I think there's generally two types of technology, aren't there? When people use the word crypto, there's the distributed ledger, and then there's the blockchain, and the two concepts don't have to be coupled. I think obviously it's very topical what's happening in the news right now, but if you look at the late 90s, there was the dot-com boom, right? And there was a lot of hype, and then there was a spectacular crash because a lot of the first generation companies didn't quite have the right business models. There was a lot of hype around the tech, but there wasn't a real application of a business model. And then that got solved in the next decade with the huge tech companies, the search companies. They nailed it with ads, basically, right? They created a really compelling business case. And you had this generation of technology companies in the last decade that have grown up. So you'll probably end up with a second generation of companies. With the blockchain, as you know, it's not as widely publicized, but there's a lot of research, a lot of different companies out there that are already deploying blockchain in the supply chain. I think they call it the value chain, don't they? That's actually pretty interesting, especially companies for corporate governance want to trace something from source through to origin, and they need to demonstrate their credentials. I think there seems to be a lot of application there, and that, I suspect what we'll see is after we'll see the second wave of real applications emerge over the next sort of 5 to 10 years as people kind of nail this stuff down. And so I do think it's an interesting technology, but it's not perfect, actually. It has downsides. There was a reason things were centralized. Decentralization is a great concept, but it also brings challenges, right? So there's a lot of challenges still to solve. I don't think it's going away, though.
Yeah, I'd agree with a lot of that. I think, the jury's out. I still think there's a lot of work in terms of what value does it have in certain industries, finance, wherever it may be. I think that, there's clearer use cases for it. I think across other industries, I think there's still a little way to go. And like you say, it's solved a lot of problems, but it's introduced other ones, as technology always does. It creates challenges, doesn't it? Social networks is a great example of that. It brings people together. It also has a darker side as well, doesn't it? So I think just like that, I think there's a lot of thinking still to do around that.
Jury's in for me. It's rubbish. It's okay. That's going a little bit too far, but there might be one or two cases. But as you've mentioned use cases that it's been applied to. These are all use cases you can apply other more centralized solutions to. And actually the idea of blockchain's decentralization is decentralizing away from organizational ownership, not decentralization. I speak as I cut my teeth in software building distributed systems at massive scale from ground up. I've built these algorithms by hand And I can tell you, like in most cases, I don't believe the blockchain or distributed ledgers are actually needed, and most of them will go away and be solved in more central solutions. And I mean not centralized as in terms of computing, centralized in organizational ownership or group ownership as a group together. In fact, loads of ledgers we're seeing today are actually centrally owned. So yeah, not a believer.
Sitting on the fence there, aren't you? It seems to me like a solution looking for a problem. At no point have I ever said in any of my meetings, what we need to do is get blockchain. It's just, it's sort of on the Gartner hype curve, isn't it, down in the delves. They do.
There'll be a few applications where it's useful, but there'll probably end up being a few where it's really useful, but not loads. Yeah.
It's like Meta, isn't it? I was in a board meeting about 2 months ago, and it's the horrible bit where you say any questions, and you think, oh God, you've got the chairman, you've got non-execs who are CEOs of other companies. The chairman's also chairman of Tesco, so you thought, what are they going to ask? You prep as much as you want, and somebody said, I've looked at your IT strategy, there's nothing about Meta in there. And I thought, I've got a couple of techniques for stalling to think. I mean, I used one earlier, passing the mic along, but I couldn't do that. Yeah, and I couldn't think of anything, I'll be honest. So I was just honest. I said, it's not in there because I don't believe it. He said, yeah, okay, good. I just thought I'd ask. Great.
And you've not got any houses in Meta at this point?
No, exactly, yeah. I was thinking, where is that? Is that Eastern Europe? I'm not sure. And then it suddenly clicked for it. Yeah, you're right. No, I can't think of anything, to be honest.
Any other questions? Any other questions?
Sure. So, to the panel really, you've got students in today who are going to come into the workforce in a couple of years' time as apprentices. We talk about boot camps, but you also had a poll on the screen at the start of the presentation about work location. People want ad hoc work locations. So what does the panel think about the onboarding of new recruits fresh into the industry that need hand-holding and coaching and mentoring? So it's not always best done virtually. Mm-hmm. So how are you going to tackle that?
It's a good question.
Well, I could share my insights. Fairly unanimously, most of the junior folks coming in like being in the office most of the time, with a bit of flexibility at the edge. That actually suits most people. They really like the spontaneousness of tapping someone on the shoulder. How did you solve that code pairing, or solve the problem, bounce an idea? It's cliched now because it's been said so many times. There was a surge. There will always be a heightened demand now for increased flexibility. I don't think that will go away. But we certainly believe that, especially at the formative stage of your career, you basically learn from other people. You've done the formal learning at school, university. You've got the knowledge. You now need to build the skills and the experience, and most of that comes from human interaction. And so, and we're not going against the tide there. That's generally most of the feedback we get is people like that. There are certain people that I think absolutely they want to work from home, but maybe they'll be suited to different types of industries. But certainly, it's not as big a problem, I think, as it's made out to be. And actually, we're seeing a reversion back, but with extra flexibility over, I think, what was there previously. Yeah, absolutely. We expect the leadership has to set the tone, and so that message has to come from the senior people. You've got to be there. You need your senior people in, setting the example, and then everyone. It's like a magnet. People will come in because they'll realise that there's only so much you can learn. You can't randomly knock on someone's Zoom door and ask them a question, right? Zoom is a very, video conference is a very transactional type of interaction. You go for a question, you solve it. That's not generally, and most people's careers advance in a crisis because you learn the most when you have to learn the most, right? It's not the day-to-day coasting. That's not how your career jumps up when you solve a really hard problem really quickly with a big team around you. And those things don't change, I don't think.
Thanks. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think make the office a compelling place to come into, because before, most organisations before the pandemic, the office was kind of mandatory. Not all, I know, more digital, and I guess younger industries not so much, but traditional industries like the one I work for, you didn't need to make the office compelling because that's where you worked generally. And what we found now, you have to work harder to make it a compelling and a pleasant place to work. And we're all working differently now. So the challenge I've seen in your exact example is, you're absolutely right. People in their earlier part of their career absolutely want to be in. There's the social element, all the rest of it. And then they find the people they need to learn off are the ones who love just going in 1 day a week or 2 days a week. So they're all in, and then there's nobody there nobody more experienced in the office. So, having communities and making sure people are talking and coming in groups and doing it, being flexible, but not just flexible for you, being flexible for the whole team. That's what we're trying to do.
I have nothing more particularly to
I think I have quite a different view, actually. So during COVID, my team, well, I wasn't even in my team during COVID, but they just all moved all over the place. So we're a London-based company, and people use it as an opportunity to move out of London. So now my team are scattered all over the place. And actually, they don't want to come back. They don't want, particularly the engineers, they do not want to come back in, and they see no point coming back in because half of them are in Romania. So they will then come in and sit there on a Teams call, and our office isn't particularly nice. So I think it might be that in bigger, when there's more, in a bigger group where you've got greater numbers of young people coming in, they will see the value, but I don't see that. So I've got some young people, they are fairly reluctant because I don't think they see a lot of value in it. And what we're having to do is change the way of building teams, change the way of building skills and getting those people to train up and get, increase their skills. So, because we have got some young ones. And so I think we're trying to do more kind of regional meetups, more big full meetups, you can kind of knock on the door, I think. You can just phone someone on Teams, and we've got a lot more of that. So I think we're sort of, it has forced us to change. I don't think it's the same in every industry. Would be my view.
What are you seeing when you're doing graduates?
Yeah, I guess the first thing is it depends on what function they come into, but obviously we're in a technology environment, so we need to focus on that. It's the real challenge, isn't it? If you want to hire, you want to create. Recruit people some people at the bottom, of course, you can create a career path, and they need to then learn from others. And my experience actually is young people, they will want to be in together. Again, they've not got families, most likely, they're single. It was some ridiculous stats, isn't it? There's a very high percentage of people meet and get married because of people they meet at work. Be interesting to see what happens to all the other stats, babies and all the rest of things that happen beyond that if people aren't meeting. A bit of Knight Rider there. But sorry, I lost my train of thought. So in the large organisations, I tend to see, again, you've just got a bigger critical mass of people. So even if 80% of the people are working from home, you've still got 20% of the people you can learn from. So in an environment where you've got multiple scrum teams, for example, if you're a younger, less experienced person, you're trying to learn, there's still people you can see. But I think it's up to the leaders to set that precedent. And there's often that dilemma, right? Because you probably think, well, I know what I'm doing. I'm going to sit at home and work from there because I can be very effective. And I've got a dog now. I need to walk the dog. And then you probably trust as a leader, you'll probably have a team that you by and large trust. So, and they know what they're doing. So in some ways it's easier to almost forget about the problem. But I think what this is basically doing is creating a divergence of different business philosophies. So there are lots and lots of companies out there, mainly tech companies, that are fully remote. Right? If you've probably got experience, if I was a young person, I wouldn't want to work for a fully remote business because how are you going to learn? I don't think you can learn as effectively in that environment. I really don't. But once you've got experience, and then you're quite comfortable working from home, and the business is set up and it's got the right practices, and you can still learn, and lots of online learning, then you can still make it effective. But there'll be a whole bunch of other businesses, probably more retail businesses, that are much faster paced, and they need people around to get things done. And you'll find, I think, different roles have different approaches to it. If you're hiring engineers and the leadership team around engineering, you'll probably find there's a lot more freedom to work from home. Perhaps if they're business analysts, architects, just a requirement to be a bit more in the office, but with the team. There has to be a purpose. That's the first thing I would say. There's no point, as a young person, there's no one there, right? But I see a divergence of different approaches. That's the main thing. So you've ultimately got to decide what is the right thing for us. And you set that, and you've got to set the tone. And you've got to, don't forget, a lot of the people in this room are successful in their careers. If you think about how you've done that, a lot of it is those fireside chats, at the coffee machine. You're building those relationships. And it's really tough to do that remotely. So if you want to develop your career, you should invest in being in the office. And then that's about you then setting the tone and building a culture of coaching that is understood at the lowest level, so that they understand what the requirements are if they're going to then move up the ranks. And if they don't want to be a manager or a leader or whatever, probably less of an issue. But I think it's about making a decision on what's right for your organisation.
Yeah, I've got a question for Tom, just around, you mentioned how you scaled the tech team and then your business in Birmingham in the last year or so. How's that been different in terms of creating a culture? You obviously had an established one in London before. How have you found creating a culture in the Midlands? Has it been a challenge?
I mean, you need, obviously, we want to hire predominantly locally, right? We came here for the talent. Obviously, you need to seed it with leadership. You can't have people walking in you have to bring that experience in. So we've been relatively successful in getting some key people to move up. I mean, it turns out for me, my commute was like equidistant. Well, it wasn't even equidistant. It was actually closer to Birmingham than London. So, you get a little bit of luck with people that like, oh, that really works for me. And then a few other people will take the opportunity. So you say, well, look, there's greater growth opportunities potentially here as this new location grows over the few years. But you do need to bring in experience. I don't think you can bring in a lot of less experienced people and expect that to be successful. Key point, we bring them in mostly, as we say. But it's we've been, there's a bit of luck there, and it's engineering led, right? It's not just technology, but it's we've got other functions, audit, legal. So it's a mixture. I think like there's no one. We're trying all channels. We'll be launching the apprenticeship program in due course. We've already done the campus. That's obviously, some people put their hand up. That's always a good one. And there's a lot of attractiveness for people starting out their careers, actually. Maybe they don't want to start in London. It's very expensive there. So there's some kind of quality of life differences as well. So, but yeah, it's gone faster, I think, than we expected or thought was possible. Yeah, we continue to go. It was just for me, wasn't it?
Any questions just for Claire? Have we got any other questions?
Just one last question for me.
Hi, Tim.
So where do you think, we've talked about technology of yesterday, we talked about technology of today. Where's technology going in 5 to 10 years' time? Any thoughts?
By the way, I don't think it matters, because I think if you build a team of problem solvers, they will move to the new technologies. Most of the technologies we use today didn't exist 10 years ago, right? So the idea of obsolescence in computer science, in tech, is guaranteed. It's like part of the game. So building just the capabilities and the skills is probably the most important point. I don't think ML will be pervasive as pervasive as people think. I think the gold standard on that will be when autonomous cars roll out, right? Because I think that will be a nadir in terms of, if that actually happens in the next 10 years, I think that would demonstrate a marked change in machine learning and AI. From what I understand, that's still getting closer, but it's a long way. So I don't think AI will become more prevalent, but it won't have the same impact maybe as it's made out in the media. More digitization of things. There's huge, vast parts of the economy that are not digitized yet. And that sounds boring, but a lot of it is about efficiency, isn't it? So just increased digitization, workflows, collaboration. It doesn't sound cutting edge like rockets or going to the moon or something, but it's actually super important in terms of building the scale, I think.
I think what I'll answer that is, I think you're right. I sort of stat on autonomous cars, essentially they're moving data centres, aren't they? And is the connectivity, going to be good enough? I'm always a believer in, necessity is the mother of invention. So look how we pivoted to get the COVID vaccines done so quickly. And what will that drive, the mRNA vaccines, and the way that they're, they can use technology to test these drugs. I'm not expert in any of that. I've worked in pharma years ago, but, I think all that. So if you want to understand where the tech will come from, look at the challenges that are going to face the world. And we know a massive amount of it's going to be in the environment and how we live. The jury's out, isn't it, of how fast can we slow the challenges we've got in the environment, how much of it will be about living with it and adjusting. So follow the social trends, and that's where the technology tends to go.
More of the same, but faster. I think that, like in 10-year horizon, there's going to be a lot of change, but it's not going to be as big bang, like futuristic as it might seem. It might be things like commoditization of like building more simple software will happen, no doubt. I think I'm going to pivot the question a little bit to talk about something that I'm passionate about, if that's okay. But one of the things I think will become more important about what we do as we build that technology and on more data, on more machines, using more resources, is to build it in a way that's more energy and carbon efficient whilst you do it. I pivoted. It's a passion thing of mine at the moment. Green software, like building, like the software you build defines the hardware that runs it. That hardware costs has an electricity cost. Even if you're using full renewable, it's taking it away from somebody else. It's still a problem. And then all the hardware, you build that hardware, ship it, move it around the world, get rid of it. The carbon costs of it's like predictions put it 14% of the full greenhouse gas footprint by 2040, like giant. So it's really early field, and it's something I'd literally speak for 2 hours on if I could. But there's all sorts you can do in building software to make it like greener, all the way through to, like, we build self-healing systems that understand their carbon impact and change themselves as they run. So yeah, that was just a little aside.
If I knew the answer to that, I could become rich, couldn't I? Because we could all, I hope that all of the things that these guys have said around the green stuff, because I've always been really passionate about that, and we've got to do it, haven't we? So I really hope that is the case. I think just a slightly different angle on it, I suppose, is that what I see is that things that were not IT things, i.e. IT didn't really have to have anything to do with, are just becoming increasingly computerized. Which presents a real problem for the IT team. So what you suddenly find is that you're responsible for the CCTV system because it's powered by a computer, or you're now responsible for all the clinical equipment because it's got a computer attached to it. And I think that what you see, I suppose, is just that the digital sort of underpowers so much more. And as an IT team, then you become responsible for more and more stuff. And that's a real challenge, because a lot of the time, you're not resourced up for it. This stuff isn't very secure. Someone's attached it onto your network. So I think that's a big challenge for us, an increasing challenge, I would say.
That's a good question, Tim. Good answers too. Any other?
Richard, you didn't answer.
What the point Aid or Tom maybe said in particular, but by the way, just on the green point, I'm just starting to see a lot more trends with just even us getting asked, what are you doing around your sustainability? We did a tender recently where they wanted to sort of see details on our carbon footprint. So we're a supplier, right? And so I guess you're probably challenging all your suppliers on that. So, and as an SME business, you're kind of going, well, we don't make anything. We ask people. Some people cycle to it, but it's about what the organisation is looking for is show us, measure it, and how can you consciously make a difference. And because then it's measurable, then you can, because it's then measurable, you can then go, right, actually maybe we can do something a bit more to try and reduce the carbon footprint. So anyway, I've lost what was the question again, Tim? 10 years. Bloody hell. I mean, I think Tom's point is spot on. If you hire the right people, whatever that business challenge comes, they will solve it. I mean, that's the simple point, isn't it? That's how I think that's how teams have always tried to tackle these things. I think there's still a huge amount of opportunity for the digitisation agenda. I mean, I was very lucky enough to be invited to the House of Lords this week for lunch, you're walking down the corridors of power, and it's just books and books and books and paper. All these bills. I don't know if anyone's been in there, but it's just wads of paper, and you're thinking, heck, how many trees have they killed here? Like, surely you can digitise that. Give them iPads or something instead of printing like legions. So I think, even in an archaic establishment like that, there's still opportunities to be far more economically responsible and use technology. But it doesn't change the fact that it's the people that are on the ground that need to make it happen. There'll be something new come around the corner, right? And then you'll then try and bolt that in. One thing I have noticed is a lot more sort of API integrated approach to technology. You don't always have to build stuff in house. You can, I think in A's world, it's probably a bit more about integrated solutions and not having to spend loads and loads of money or huge investments on making them happen. But at the same time, if you need to solve something that's much more significant, clearly Carl's team are obviously amazing at it. So yeah, that's my view.
Yeah, I would I'm just interested in going a little bit back to the green question and get the views of the CIOs on the panel, particularly. The reason, so I work for a company, Snow Software. We do software asset management. You may have heard of us, who knows? But one of the things we experimented with is we spidered across the network. We know what all your servers are, what all your applications are, and we put forward a proposition around an environmental dashboard to make some kind of recommendations to CIOs to say, okay, well, we think if you move that proportion of the workload over here, we think you could save this kind of, and we used some sources. One of the things I was interested in, though, is that when we went out to a lot of those companies, everyone was really excited about it, but nobody was willing to part with any dollars to buy it. And I'm kind of interested on your views about when do you think that pivot point is going to happen? Because I'm certain it is going to happen. At some point, there's going to be some kind of compelling event that happens, but what do you think that compelling event is going to be, where all of a sudden we move from interested in to I'm willing to pay some money to get that environmental output?
In an unsophisticated way, as soon as there's business impact. So everything you just described to me sounds like a proxy for the cost of energy, because ultimately it's electricity, I think, that's powering it, right? So it seems to be somewhat connected to the cost of energy, which obviously we're seeing dramatic impacts right now. Usually it takes a few leaders and the right tooling and measurements and data to be produced to kind of articulate this. So that's a pretty interesting area. I mean, I guess it touches on, data center efficiency has been a huge focus for years, right? They would put data centers in Iceland if they could, but the latency is a problem, isn't it? But
it was just extremely interesting because of the number of people we approached with the proposition who were interested, but none of them were willing to part. And you think, when does the world shift where we're actually
show a compelling ROI? So I think everything you describe would need the right measurements to be put in place. So you'd need really good measurements around the cost of how this configuration what it would have cost versus this. That's actually not that easy to build, that level of instrumentation. It's doable, but it will just take effort, which in itself has to be justified. But I think regulation will help, maybe. I mean, the regulation is increasing quite rapidly. The regulation starts usually with measure. report, disclose, state your status quo, not improve, just what do you do, attribute yourself, attribute your costs, be transparent. Then, which takes engineering, takes a lot of work to get to that point. That's a lot of uplift. There's a lot going on in the financial industry right now about breaking down risks into different climate changes. Once you've got the really good measurements, then they start to focus and say, okay, now we're going to set targets. So I think probably a mix of reg plus lowering the cost of measuring that stuff, and maybe more commoditized ways of doing it. And then probably within 3 years, it probably will be something people look at, especially if the cost of energy remains the way it is at the moment.
Yeah, I don't know if it was your organisation that approached us. We've had very similar, and I think it might have been, but yeah, I can't remember. Your data centre point is important. When we did the business case for cloud migration early on, that was in there, and our sustainability director was very interested, helped us beef up the business case with a lot more data, a lot more facts. I mean, ultimately for us, we have, sustainability targets, a certain percentage, reduction in our carbon footprint every year, cumulative. So anything that's going to help towards that is going to be attractive to us. So when that proposition that you're talking about, like you say, there's a compelling ROI, there's a compelling, certainty around it. Is this actually going to happen? And I think then finally, regulation. Our banks say if we want to lend you money, you've got to have a very clear carbon reducing agenda. So it isn't just about can you afford to pay it back, can you afford to have that level of facility. It's almost what's your agenda in that way. And when you state it, you go from 10 banks willing to give you a facility to maybe 4. So all these things will make that a lot more compelling over time.
Price, aligned to price, just like clearly. Conscientiousness. Some businesses and people are conscientious and do consider this. And then the final thing is just being forced, right? Which is the regulation point, or even it's not just regulating every organisation; it's regulating organisations so it flows down, so the behaviour flows down. So if I am a supplier, I have to be carbon neutral or zero carbon because the business I am supplying to does. And the flow down of regulation is important. But there's loads and loads of stuff you can do positively now, without having to solve that problem, because that's going to take years for it to it's starting, right? We're seeing it in public sector bids and all that, but there's loads of stuff you can do now to improve things in the technology you build that will align to price, but you can give you that extra little bit of reason to do something. Sometimes it only takes a little bit more reason if something's well aligned to price to push yourself to that. And you can also embed your own governance processes to do it.
So I think, in my experience as a CIO, we are all reeling really from the expectations of the pace of technology that's happened over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, and expectations around digital, expectations around cyber, the business wanting to transform in so many ways, everyone moving to work remotely, and I think that stuff like that, whilst this is my view of why you'll get a really good reaction and everyone will look at that and go, that's brilliant, but do you know what? That's not at the top of my agenda, because at the moment I've got 10 other things that are really, 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 really urgent. And I think it's just how do you get it to the top of a CIO's agenda? And probably the only way you do that, as the guys have said, is really where it starts to generate massive, significant commercial value that is more important then to focus on that than it is to focus on digital or some other opportunity. But my experience with CIOs and CIOs I speak to is we are just so busy because there's just so much going on in technology.
To the point around prioritization, if you're building, because I'm going to talk from a builder's point of view, but if you're building software, it's not necessarily sustainability, green becomes a non-functional need or a non-functional requirement, then you can just treat it as all other non-functionals and balance them. Of course, you're going to prioritize one over another, but kind of have it as a non-functional need allows your architects to go and talk to the business about the difference that is made to that non-functional by balancing off against others, and choosing, maybe to go with less availability because it's going to be greener means you don't have to focus on a big program of work to embed sustainability, but you can think about it as you think about other non-functionals.
I'll just add a couple of things, actually. One of the things, I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, as you probably know, and I'm absolutely shocked just how many graduates are coming out of university looking specifically for jobs in sustainability. I've never seen anything like it. So there's clearly a very strong agenda for that generation that this is important. You might well find that suppliers, to the point around competitive advantage, you start actually using this as a way to differentiate its product. If BJSS are going up against one of the arch enemies like an Digital or something like that, and their proposition is we can code in a greener way, and as their customer views that as important, that you would like to think there's a stronger argument to using BJSS, right? And there's also, from a hiring perspective, it's also important. I'm quite proud, actually. One of the people in the room used to work for an organisation, and I was able to hire a head of data for them. And this head of data, and it's for an airline, by the way. And he said, "I will not work for an organisation in the airline industry." I said, "Okay, why is that?" "Because of the carbon footprint issue." And I said, "Ha, I have a sustainability policy for you. Read that." And the sustainability policy set out in detail how they were going to get to a carbon neutral position by 2050 in their case. And that person ended up joining the organisation. So, this is an issue for some people. So we should take it seriously, or at least, yeah.
I got obviously inclusion in tech. Is it on anybody's agenda looking at systems that support disability? Because we're sort of looking at that, fashion, retailer, what we can do to help more people with disabilities come into the business.
I'll just quickly start on that, because again, this same organisation, financial services business that we were tendering for with the sustainability point, they also asked us specifically to address how can we recruit more people with disabilities. That's a really tough one, right? Because no one puts I can't ever remember anyone putting on their CV, by the way, I've got a disability. And by the way, those disabilities aren't always physical, right? There's a lot of hidden disabilities. What you can do, there are a number of things you can do around proactive when you're advertising for positions, is proactively saying we welcome, just as simple as that, we welcome people with disabilities. We have the right infrastructure to enable them to work for us. There are, for people with certain hidden, with sort of neurodiversity issues, that you can have, issues maybe the wrong word, but challenges. You can create, there's even websites you can sort of put your adverts through to sort of take out some of that bias, so that those roles apply better to people that are challenged in that way. So there are things you can do for sure. So
I actually think it's probably more a question of in terms of, I assume you're talking about recruitment as opposed to the product or the service that your company creates that helps.
Yeah, well, obviously, if you bring people in from an IT systems point of view, from I think software engineer and sort of all roles, is it we're kind of thinking about what do I need to do to have the right system?
You mean create a workplace environment that supports that? I mean, I think most companies have got reasonably well developed policies that'll accommodate, they'll make adjustments to the workplace to support that. Most decent companies, I think, will do that. I suspect it's more that there's a lot of people with disabilities that never think of applying because they just don't think it's maybe going to work. And so it's probably more about the ones that do apply. I think that's the easier case because you can actually make the accommodations and you can work to make it. It's more about the pool of talent out there that's untapped because they don't feel that they could even contemplate or even approach that industry because they don't have a role model there, or they don't have, it just doesn't seem something that would work. So it's probably more about, as you say, on the front foot, explaining how you can make those accommodations, or actually actively going out and looking. Because I think if you're trying to hire, whatever agent you go to, they're going to follow the path of least resistance, right? So if you need to be prescriptive probably on what your diversity hiring requirements are, and that might mean it'll take longer, because it'll take longer to find those other candidates, because they'll come through non-conventional channels, and you have to consciously choose to take a bit longer, and that's what we found, I think.
I'll just quickly add to that. By the way, there's only one agency, it's Xpertise, just to be clear on that. One of the things that, if it's important, that get a role model, find someone in the organisation that and pimp them out. It sounds crude, right? But actually, if you've got a disability and you can see evidence that there is someone happy and they're enjoying and they've got that supportive environment. It's the same if you want to hire more women. You find the role models internally, and you put them on your website, and you put them as part of your branding, your company branding to work for you. Just make it visible. Then that's a first step.
Yeah, we're very much in the camp. We've got well-defined policies, a newly hired head of D&I. So I think we're doing all we can in that way. I think we're making some great successes from what I see.
This is a really good question, which I have just had to reflect. So I obviously am a woman, and also I do have a disability. So I've had MS for over 20 years, and yet I don't put myself out. Nobody, because it's not something that people feel, I don't think, particularly comfortable talking about. My son also has got ADHD and autism, and generally I'd say to him, don't put it on your CV. So I actually think you raise a really, really good point, and probably I should do more. So I should hang my head in shame, really, James. And it's a really good point.
I think it's a big thing that we all will have to approach in different ways, and especially when you kind of look at office systems, Teams, right, and things like that. And actually, we're all on Teams, but for people that are blind, it's going to have different challenges in tech of how we support and include more people.
Thank you so much for everyone.